Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause here, and I wanted to bring you another article about the elections tonight, which are ending soon. So keep an eye out. But here's an article by the New York Times that says Georgia special elections comes to a nail-biting finish. And I'm gonna scroll down. Basically, they're talking about how the race is tight, and there's a bunch of new early voters, and but a lot of them are Republican, and so that you won't be able to tell by the early votes who's going to win. And then it says expect a long night because Georgia basically counts really slow for some reason, really slowly. But the interesting part of this article, saved by gunman's attack question mark. For all they're talking about the shooting at the congressional baseball game where Scalise was shot, Senator Scalise, who's a Republican, and he is still in the hospital. For all the early and absentee ballots already cast, the race is competitive enough that Election Day could prove decisive, and perhaps showing how badly they need a lift. Some supporters of Miss Handel have seized on a liberal anti-Trump gunman's attack at a Republican congressional baseball practice last week as a boon, thinking it could jolt at least some complacent voters into turning out for her. I think the shooting is going to win this election for us, said Brad Carver, a Republican official in Georgia at the county and state level. A little-known conservative group bought a small amount of television time on Fox News over the weekend for an ad showing emergency crews carrying victims of the attack on stretchers. The same unhinged leftists cheering last week's shooting are all backing John Ossoff, and if he wins, they win, an announcer intones. Ms. Handel's campaign denounced the ad but did not call for it to be taken down or be taken off the air. This is quite interesting. My first reaction is I think it's smart to use the shooting, to try to gain points, and I think it will work. And then my second reaction is like, this is pretty intense. I mean, you have a picture of victims being carried off, and then you're blaming leftist voters, like, in general, and saying that they're voting for Ossoff. So, and that's pretty intense. But the reason, a lot of times I think there would be pushback against that. It's a very dangerous, a very risky way of campaigning. But since there's so much outside funding and people likely know that, I don't think they'll see these leftists as, kind of their own. They'll see them at, a lot as outside forces. And so, I don't think people will care quite as much or push back quite as much as normal. So this probably will work to a large extent. It says each side badly needs a win. Republicans have held the 6th district for nearly 40. Oh, by the way, I just think this is really interesting, that a gunman went out on a shooting spree, on the left, and it could very well cost them. It could cost the left the elections. Each side badly needs a win. Republicans have held the 6th district for nearly 40 years. A loss would reverberate in Washington, imperiling the party's already stalled agenda and prompting some incumbents to retire rather than seek re-election. Most immediately, it would threaten the Republican health care overhaul, which is expected to come up for a Senate vote in the next 2 weeks. Democrats, already enjoying a strong recruiting season, would see a bumper crop of candidates for 2018. But Democrats who have already fallen short in special elections for House seats in Kansas and Montana, where their candidates face stronger opposition, sorely need more than a moral victory. They need to show they can compete and prevail in the kind of wealthy, high-educated districts that represent their most promising path to a House majority next year. Um, so this is really being set up as, Trump versus and the Trump agenda versus Democrats and the Democratic agenda, especially on healthcare. But mainly, this is like, is Trump good for the Republicans or not? They're trying to delegitimize Trump and say, if Trump can't lead to a victory here, then he's delegitimized as president, and he's bad for the Republicans. What we know already. Tuesday's result may sharply affect congressional recruitment, retirements, and fundraising. But for Democrats' chances of recapturing the House in 2018, the lesson is the same whether Mr. Ossoff wins with 51% or loses with 49%. Mr. Ossoff's performance has already confirmed that Republicans in wealthy conservative-leaning districts will be burdened by Mr. Trump's unpopularity. Bull fucking shit. Fake news bullshit. Do you think that this has anything to do at all with the fact that Ossoff spent like 4 times what the Republicans spent? Maybe that just has a small something to do with it. Do you think Democrats can afford to pour in 4 times what the opponent is pouring in every race? I don't think so. And do you think that, people from California, for instance, are going to be giving money to every election? No, this is something that's happening because it's still part of the presidential hangover. These are still some of the first elections. Most of what the makeup of Congress is going to be determined in the midterms. And then there's going to be a whole crap ton of races, and people are going to concentrate on their own races for the most part. Says previously safe Republican incumbents in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Miami, and Orange County, California could all be vulnerable next year. The bottom line, a close race in Georgia's 6th district is consistent with a strong Democratic performance in next year's midterm elections. Strong enough, perhaps, to retake the House. A few thousand votes either way won't change that. Well, to some extent, if the Republicans win the House by 1 seat, then a few thousand votes will change that. The tone that I get from these articles, because I've seen a bunch of them now that are like talking about, the Republicans trying to take, or the Democrats trying to take back the majority. They don't seem very confident. This is like a long shot. And they need to win a lot of seats. I don't have the exact numbers on me right now, but they're like kind of hoping for it, and there's an outside shot for it. But they would need a really strong sweep of a lot of seats, and it just seems like, Trump is more popular than I think they thought, and Trump still has, a lot of popularity among his voters. Something like, I saw a poll once or a survey where 86% of Republicans were still approving of Donald Trump. So, and remember, there have been never Trumpers in the Republican Party. So 86% is rather high. So Trump is overwhelmingly supported by the Republicans, and he's the type of candidate that when it comes down to it, he'll end up getting more votes than his polls will show, because then, like approval ratings and stuff, because Republicans will want to vote for him over Democrats in general. So of that 14% that wasn't approving of Trump, a lot of them will still vote for Trump when it comes down to it, or for Republican candidates, I should say, because obviously Trump is still up for, he is not up for a re-election yet, so not till 2020 when he gets in for another 4 years, bitches. Sorry about that. Tuesday's other special election. Though the Georgia battle has... I didn't actually even know about this one because nobody's been really talking about it, so I wanted to cover this too. It says, though the Georgia battle has consumed the country's political class, another special election on Tuesday will decide who succeeds Mike Mulvaney, who represented South Carolina's highly conservative 5th Congressional District before he was named Director of the Office of Management and Budget. National Democrats have done little to compete in the district, which remains strongly supportive of Mr. Trump, and Ralph W. Norman, a Republican former state legislator, is widely expected to defeat Archie Parnell, a Democrat and former Goldman Sachs tax expert. But Mr. Parnell had more money to spend than Mr. Norman in the final weeks, and some South Carolina Democrats expect a surprisingly competitive finish. Now I want to show you something here that this Ralph Norman guy. It says here are some of his views. He's very, very pro-Trump. Like, all of his views seem to be Trump's views. Ralph Norman represented District 48 in the South Carolina House of Representatives from 2008 to 2017. After announcing his candidacy for the open 5th District seat, he resigned from the State House of Representatives on February 16, 2017, saying, "I think it's unfair to take a paycheck from the taxpayers while I'm running." On his campaign website, Norman identified introducing term limit and balanced budget legislation, two highly Trump, positions that he campaigned on. Repealing the Affordable Care Act, another Trump position. Increasing the retirement age and I haven't heard Trump talk about increasing the retirement age, and reducing benefits to sustain Social Security, cutting taxes. So actually, on Social Security, I think he's a little different than Trump. Cutting taxes and the construction of a border wall. So cutting taxes is Trump position. Construction of the border wall is a Trump position. So as you can see, most of his large positions are Trump positions. So this is a candidate that we really want Ralph Norman to win because he will support Trump in many ways, and it sounds like he is going to win. But the New York Times says that there's going to be a late push for his opponent, but it sounds like it's not really in question. I haven't been able to find polls on this, but we'll see. I expect to go Republican, especially because South Carolina is so Republican and so pro-Trump. They were one of the states that really gave Trump a push in the primaries. The fiscally conservative group South Carolina Club for Growth gave Norman an A in its 2015-2016 scorecard for the South Carolina House of Representatives. So not only is he pro-Trump, a fiscally conservative group is giving him an A, so, in his voting record. So he's going to have true conservatives on his side as well. The South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, a pro-business advocacy organization, gave Norman a 35 in his 2016 scorecard. His 4-year average was 74.3. As a state representative, Norman was one of 2 representatives to vote against an infrastructure funding plan up to 2.2 billion through bonding of vehicle sales tax and DMV fees. We need to reform the Department of Transportation before we throw a bucket of money at them, he said. He voted in favor of allowing the governor to appoint a superintendent of education and removing the Confederate flag from the State House. And I don't have a problem with the Confederate flag being removed from the State House. I think that's up to these states to decide because, on one hand, it represents a time where slavery was acceptable, and I can see why groups of people such as blacks would feel alienated by that. But at the same time, it's got its own symbolism and history beyond that, and so if they wanted to keep it and just try to remember the good parts of what the Confederate flag stood for, then such as independence and things like that, then I don't have a problem with that either. It's really up to these states to decide on an individual basis. But it seems like most of the politicians have been against the Confederate flag. And honestly, that's probably the right position because you don't want to alienate a whole, group of people within your country or within your state. So that's all I have for you now. Keep an eye open. I read it was 8 o'clock when the exit polls will come out for South Carolina, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And so keep an eye open for that because this would be a big win. I guess here's some financial campaign fundraising reports I could go over where Archie Parnell, because they kind of said that Archie Parnell had more money at the end. But if you look, Rolf Norman, he spent $183,000 in the primaries, I think this is, while Archie Parnell spent only $64,000. But he had $590,000 compared to $243,000. So overall, he had over twice as much to spend, and he probably spent it early. And then, sure, at the very end, Parnell maybe made a push, but with early voting and stuff, when you make a late push, you miss a lot of those early voters. So it really, everything's pointing to, from what I'm reading, Rolf Norman should win this. And if he does, he will be a staunch, Donald Trump advocate. So I will talk to you guys later. Keep an eye open for both the Georgia 6th district seat and the South Carolina 5th district seat.